All right, back again here, taking a look at the Mankiw approach to crowding out. Let's recap what crowding out was. Number one, the government runs a budget deficit, which means they're going to need to borrow money to finance that. When the government needs to borrow money, we got some lending and borrowing that's going to happen, right? Households are going to buy those bonds, they're going to lend. So the government runs a deficit, they need to borrow. What's going to happen in the story of crowding out is that's going to drive up the real interest rates. And when interest rates go up, that's the cost of borrowing. So private investment spending is going to go down. Businesses aren't going to borrow as much to build factories because it's so much more expensive to borrow. So that was the basic story. Now, how does Mankiw deal with the details of the story? See, before Krugman had said, hey, the government's going to go into the loanable funds market as a borrower. So he shifted demand. Mankiw, though, says the government doesn't go anywhere. The government stands right where it is and announces, we're issuing new bonds. You bring the money to us. They don't go get the money. They say, bring the money to us. They don't go to the loanable funds market. They ask the loanable funds market to come to them. So some of these households, they go, hey, the government's borrowing. Maybe we should, instead of lending money to some private businesses, we should take some of that money and go lend it to the government. So we're going to go buy some bonds. It's a less risky investment. So that might be a good idea. Where are they going to get the money to go lend to the government? They pull it out of the loanable funds market. They take some of that money that they would have lent to a business and go lend it to the government. So in Mankiw's graph, because he treats it that way, it's the households, the savers, the lenders who pull money out of the loanable funds market. If that happens, we're taking this graph, and what are we looking at happening? We're going to get supply. Supply is going to shift. It's going to shift there to the left. How much does it shift by? The magnitude of the shift is the amount that the government borrows. It increases its borrowing, so it's going to shift by that amount. Notice when we shift supply to the left, that's going to cause the real interest rate to go up. When the real interest rate goes up, we're going to have a reduction in private investment spending. So if we're talking about businesses responding, they're not responding to the fact that, oh, there's other borrowers, the government's borrowing money. The businesses start to respond because the price of borrowing went up. Real interest rate went up. So that's a movement on the curve. So right there, boom, we see that movement right there along the demand curve. Okay? That's the private investment spending going down. Same story as before, but two different approaches to how it's graphed. Krugman shifts demand to the right. Mankiw shifts supply to the left. Two very different approaches. In both cases, interest rates went up. In both cases, private investment spending went down. They both tell the story of crowding out. But sometimes I hear people argue about one is right and the other's wrong. So take a look at the Krugman video. See what you think about that story. See what you think about the Mankiw story. You might have a preference one way or the other, but then check out the video on reconciling the Krugman and Mankiw approach, and we'll show why they're exactly the same.